guidance to editors that you cannot publish anything that is to be upsetting, insulting, or objectionable to some people, because some people could be 5 people. All right. You may recall that a couple of months ago, early on in this channel's history, I covered a letter written by Professor Anna Krylov called The Peril of Politicizing Science. She's actually back, and this is a new article from her in co-authorship with Gernot Frenking and Peter Gill that I actually want to read through, and because she is quite a bit of a rock star with respect to the STEM side of things, and pushing back on some of the, for lack of a better way to describe the totality of the ideology of woke, of the wokeness that is invading STEM disciplines. And so she and these other authors wrote a particular piece that alerted my attention to something disturbing, but very well worded response. So I want to take some time to read through this, give you my thoughts on top of it, and ask you to give your thoughts in return, and that is much appreciated. So, Royal Society of Chemistry provides guidelines for the censorship of its editors. And unless you think I am crazy, no, she actually has it linked here. She has quotes from the whole thing, from the guidelines, and it is quite disturbing what the Royal Society of Chemistry is providing as guidelines for the editors of its peer-reviewed journals. So let us begin. Anton von Leeuwenhoek, I probably pronounced that wrong, was a founder of microbiology. By perfecting lens grinding, he created microscopes capable of 200 times magnification. Without him, we wouldn't have a whole lot of the magnification of microscopes that we have now. Leeuwenhoek was the first to observe blood cells and microorganisms. He communicated his observations to the Royal Society, which published them in Philosophical Transactions. Leeuwenhoek was also the first to observe spermatoza in semen, a breakthrough in understanding sexual reproduction. However, he was hesitant to communicate his findings, concerned that they might be offensive. He prefaced his report, quote, "If your lordship should consider that these observations may disgust or scandalize the learned, I earnestly beg your lordship to regard them as private and to publish or destroy them as your lordship sees fit." The modern day, the older day of taking offense to things is what we're preluding at here. He was afraid people would be offended by it, and so he said, "Do what you will with it. This is what I found." His lordship, and to that matter, you know, that's my kind of philosophy with a lot of things. You're supposed to find the truth as a scientist. What other people do with it is another question in here. People can, in general, ignore it, destroy it, attack it, any number of different things, but it is your job to, as a scientist doing the research, your telos is to find the truth, as it were. His lordship, the president of the Royal Society, did opt to publish van Leeuwenhoek's observations in Philosophical Transactions in 1678, thus beginning the field of sperm biology. Things could have played out differently for Leeuwenhoek in 2021. I am butchering the pronunciation. I know that. I honestly don't know how to pronounce his name. Others can please chime in with the pronunciation of that. I usually can get it right if I hear it said instead of trying to read it. Per recent guidelines of the Royal Society of Chemistry, a professional society publishing more than 50 chemistry journals, editors must now consider, quote, whether or not any content, words, depictions, or imagery might have the potential to cause offense. And yes, I can back this up. I dug up the document and read it myself, at least what was available there. It is disturbing. Again, I apologize. I'm still having microphone issues. I'm trying to work out the issue because of buzzing in ears and what have you. I'm going to eventually get a new microphone and address the situation. We'll put it that way. The document begins, quote, "We have a shared responsibility to guard against all forms of discrimination or exclusion. We expect all staff, authors, reviewers, and editors to cooperate with measures introduced to ensure inclusion and non-discriminatory conduct. Our aim is for all published material to be respectful, accurate, and relevant. The aim of this guidance is to help you to identify and prevent the publication of inappropriate content in our journals and books, and to encourage you to reflect on how inappropriate content can impact members of the community and readers around the world. The guidelines continue, quote, words, depictions, and imagery have the potential to cause offense. Therefore, we need to consider how the content might be perceived by others. There can be a disparity between the intention of an author and how their content might be received. It is the perception of the recipient that determines offense, regardless of the author intent. This highlights the need for scrutiny and awareness at all stages, from content creation to publication. What causes somebody offense is highly subjective. And right now we live in a world where what somebody might be reasonably not offensive, find reasonably to be not offensive when they write it, is offensive to somebody. Odds are, if you're saying something, you're going to offend somebody. Odds are it's going to happen. Whether we choose it or not is something else. Sometimes. So if you're reporting something that happens to be true, or let me put it this way, you're reporting the results of your experiment and they don't fit to somebody else's ideological purview of way the world should be, is that going to cause someone offense? This is how unfortunately unwise this kind of policy is, much to the distinguished professors here in writing about it. This is a problem. This is a distinct problem because it is so overbroad that it could very easily be used to shut down anything. Anything that might be the mildestly off from what have you, you're not free to explore, and there is a lack of viewpoint diversity there because of it. An accompanying memo clarifies, offense, quote, offense is a subjective matter, no kidding, and sensitivity to it spans a considerable range. However, it is the perception of the recipient that we should consider regardless of the author's intention. That is, the offense is understood in terms of the feelings of the offended, not whether there is a plausible reason to be offended. This is at odds with the quote Free Speech and Academic Freedom report by the UK Department of Education, and which states, quote, potential for offense caused by speech should not itself be used to prevent lawful freedom of speech. So, for those unfamiliar, the Royal Society of Chemistry is based in England. Most of the journals are based in the UK, rather. Though the journals can be read internationally, it's not uncommon to read journals internationally at this point, because what do we say with communality? Scientific knowledge belongs to all. So you often get licenses with different universities in the US to journals abroad. That does happen. What sort of inappropriate content should editors be on the lookout for? The guidelines provide a list of 15 indicators of inappropriate content, including, quote, harmful, hateful, harassment, unwanted content that makes others feel intimidated or humiliated, material that presents explicit, exploitive, obscene, or degrading text, pictures, and illustrations, any content that could any content that could reasonably offend someone on the basis of their age, gender, race, sexual orientation, religious or political beliefs, marital or parental status, physical features, national origin, social status, or disability, and, quote, likely to be upsetting, insulting, or objectionable to some or most people. Okay, let me finish this paragraph. The authors of the guidelines could have saved some ink and shortened the list to either of the last two, as each is sufficiently broad to justify censoring anything in chemistry and beyond. Yeah, that latter sentiment right there, I agree with. Understand something. This is the publisher of a journal telling editors you cannot allow things that might cause somebody to be offended. That's what this is saying. And when you're dealing with scientific research and publishing, yeah, you go at each other over ideas and controversial ideas in your own respective fields. You do that all the time. You have to be able to not be personally offended at these different things to do that. And, you're not supposed to take your personal animus against somebody into account when you are considering the results of some, oh goodness, again, I apologize for the microphone. I'm going to get a new microphone. Sometime or another, I'm going to get a new microphone. I apologize for the problem here. Because I can hear it I can hear it in the headphones here that I'm having an issue. Anyway, this is a great way to censor, yes, but I'm also thinking of the longer term effect of guidelines like that. Thankfully, I did a quick search for a bunch of different publishers in the U.S. who are U.S. based, and thankfully this has not come to the U.S. Not to say that it won't. At least as far as I can tell, it's not come to the U.S. And so this is disturbing because you may eventually run into the situation where a young scientist like myself who wants to explore a controversial idea, or not a controversial idea, but even just a different way of approaching something, but they can't because you feel like it might offend somebody. Because like what I was asking before, this kind of thing likely to be upsetting, insulting, or objectionable to some or most people. So it's not even a majority, just some people. Just some people. That could be 2 or 3 people somewhere. That is so overbroad. And that's almost impossible to work by. But for the young scientist like me who's trying to get their career off the ground, and as everybody who works in academia knows, a lot of your career depends upon publish, getting your papers done and published. This is going to push people in the direction, something like this would push young scientists in the direction of publishing something that is nice, fits a particular kind of narrative, or not even fits a particular narrative, but fits the dominant train of thought, rather than going in a different direction with different trains of thought or different ideas on how something works and trying to test that theory that they come up with or that hypothesis that they come up with, and perhaps finding something is not quite finding out something new that we need to know about, making a break. It's going to, there we go. That's what I was looking for. It's going to discourage breakthroughs because you're not able to then approach things from different perspectives if you want to get things published, because if your different perspective then offends somebody, well, the editor can't publish it. That's what something like this would do. That's disturbing, and very disturbing in so many levels, and would be so detrimental to science. And I think it has to be, it's not listed as one of the main things with universalism, though I think it can be in an unwritten way, unless you want to redefine what it means by merit. So universalism, the normative principle of universalism, you're talking about evaluating all work equally based solely on the merit of the work, not based on race, sex, gender, all that kind of stuff. Not based on that. But you perhaps also shouldn't be evaluating either based on political affiliation or the worldview of the author, or the authors or the reviewers. Shouldn't be. This seems to me that it would discourage that it would push people toward evaluating things based upon the worldview presented in the article, if they can deduce that. Or to say even the worldview of the article says something to the effect of, the article suggests that the author has a different worldview than mine, therefore it might cause offense, therefore I can't publish it. That's very bad. It's a lot of censorship, and it doesn't help with the viewpoint diversity and discipline, which is extremely important if you want the pursuit of the truth. If you want to go after the truth, you need to be able to approach it from different perspectives, and therefore you need viewpoint diversity on things, not just in STEM fields or anything like that, but really in anything, if that's your goal, is the pursuit of the truth. One might wonder, how likely would a chemistry paper be to contain such inappropriate content? After all, chemistry is blissfully distant from such contentious areas as human biology, heredity, and sexual reproduction. Yet recent examples show that even writing about highly technical matters can be a minefield of offenses. As one of us recently documented in The Peril of Politicizing Science, you can go back on this channel and find that if you'd like, an audio overview of it with my thoughts, but also the article is there linked in that particular video, or it's in the thing here. Of course, this will be linked in the description for you, don't worry. Content that is objectionable to some includes names of scientific discoveries and equations such as Shockley quasar limit and Newton's laws, technical terms such as quantum supremacy, master password, and dummy variable, and a slew of plain English words. For example, normal allegedly makes most people feel excluded. So much for normal pH and normal distribution. And I'm going to pause here for a minute. If you saw the video yesterday, you would notice that I did on E.O. Wilson, you would notice the gross oversimplification of the normal distribution of statistics, somehow claiming that the normal distribution of its statistics assumes that we're comparing people to some standard mean of something or another when it's used that way, when that is not the assumption of the normal distribution of statistics broadly. So you can see that video if you want to go on that one, but that's another thing that somebody could be offended by, is just the normal distribution itself for another reason. To add to Professor Krylov's thing here that was in the Scientific American article. Oh, goodness. So much for normal pH and normal distribution. Some scholars, including an associate vice president of Mount Royal University in Canada, are offended by English grammar and are calling for the rejection of capital letters as a symbol of hierarchy and oppression. Yes, I did see that commentary too. Following the guidelines are RSC, Royal Society of Chemistry, editors now to prevent publication of pH, pKa, and M. These are standard units used in chemistry, and they all have capital letters. What are you going to do with that, with units? I can think of something in meteorology would be pascals or hectopascals. HPA, it's spelled with a capital P, usually not with a lowercase p. So that would be offensive to somebody. The list goes on with those kinds of examples, because when you're talking about the units of measurement of different things, a bunch of them do have capital letters like that, and it's be all sorts of a mess. Suppression, quote, the suppression, try that again. Censorship, quote, the suppression or prohibition of parts of books, films, news, etc. that are considered obscene, politically unacceptable, or a threat to security is already reality in scientific publishing. Today, censorship is administered not by repressive governments, but by Twitter vigilantes, or more generally, outrage mobs. An outrage mob is defined as, quote, a group or crowd of people whose goal it is to sanction or punish the individual's organization they consider responsible for something that offends, insults, or affronts their beliefs, values, or feelings. In 2020, that's a German chemistry journal, I'm pretty sure. I cannot pronounce it. I apologize. I'm not going to be able to pronounce that one off the top of my head. Again, if I can hear the pronunciation, I'll be able to pronounce it, but I'm not going to be able to pronounce it off that way. So I'm going to presume that's a German chemistry journal, or one in Europe, but removed a published paper from their website in response to the demands of an offended mob. In 2021, a paper in the Journal of Hospital Medicine, there's a typo here, a paper in the Journal of Hospital Medicine about the perils of tribalism in scientific discourse was retracted and republished along with an apology for this microaggression. Apparently, the word tribalism belongs to the list of oppressive, culturally appropriative language. So I'm going to send you back. There's a video I did on this channel that points out that microaggressions and the research surrounding microaggressions is pretty lousy, actually. So I'm going to point you back on that channel. On this channel, there's a thing about that. And that just crazy. The Journal of Intelligence explicitly states on its website that it will not consider manuscripts that quote, lead to or enhance political controversies. Two things. How do you know that something's going to lead to a political controversy? And the other question there is, how are you going to have breakthroughs then? How do you have breakthroughs then if you don't have some amount of controversy? Or political controversy? Well, maybe not, but okay. Still, either way, that's unhelpful. It's unhelpful to the pursuit of the truth to have something like that. More examples can be found in a recent study by Stevens, Jussum, and Honeycutt. I'm going to look that one up because I think that would be good for my locals members to look at, and also I may cover it on this channel. This work also explores current mechanisms of censorship and suppression of scholarship. Importantly, it highlights the responsibility of authorities in resisting outrage mobs, calls for punishment and suppression of ideas. Although outrage mobs often trigger the punishment process in Western democracy, mobs no longer actually burn witches at stakes. For most, punishment to occur in academia, some authority has to agree to implement the mob's punishment. Mobs do not get papers retracted. That is the decision of editors and editorial boards. Thus, the key turning point in whether an academic outrage mob is effective at punishing an academic for their ideas is usually the action of authorities, end quote. Hence, it is imperative for our leadership to resist the mobs and defend the institutions they are entrusted with against the ideological subversion. This is a correct statement. It is entirely, when you're talking about journals, one of the reasons journals exist is the normative principle of communality, that scientific knowledge belongs to all. It also gives a mechanism for organized skepticism whereby people are, rigorously peer reviewing each other's work, or at least they would hope they would be rigorous. Sometimes I doubt that given some of the articles I review of late. That's a whole other quandary. But that thing is, the editors have to be dedicated to the pursuit of the truth. So if you're listening to me and you're listening to this channel, first off, thank you for listening. But also, if you happen to be an editor of a peer-reviewed journal, do not bow to an outrage mob when they come. Invite somebody in that group to publish a counterpiece with you. There's often comment and reply exchanges with journals and what have you. This letter is an example of that, where you're commenting on something that somebody's written. This is not necessarily a peer-reviewed thing, although she's got plenty of citations here and there in this. They've got plenty of citations in this, I should say. But don't give in and just retract something because a mob of people is upset. And often enough, they're very small in reality to a lot of the people that are reading the journal. It's just that they tend to scream the loudest. And if you are seeing a mob go after a journal article, or a journal, or an editor, or a group of editors, or what have you, to get something retracted, tell the editor no. Tell the editor not to retract it, that you don't want them to retract it. And this is one thing why, even if you don't agree with what was said in the piece that might be retracted, that is the only successful way to push back on these kinds of things, is for editors to stand up and say no, and for other people who are reading the journal and want to know to also say, no, we don't want you to retract this thing just because it says something we may disagree with. Let's comment back and forth. Let's have a discussion about it. But the important thing to understand with some of the wokeness and ideology here is they don't look at debate as being a good thing. They don't look at discussion as being a good thing. So that's why there's at times the outrage mobs and cancel culture that you have here. I'm going to go find that paper that she mentioned here. They mentioned here. I'm very curious about it. Let us finish this up. The guidelines were created by the RCS Committee of Inclusion and Diversity as a new addition to their Framework for Action in Scientific Publishing, developed to address alleged systemic and individual biases. RSC has also issued a joint commitment for action on inclusion and diversity in publishing, already endorsed by many other publishers, pledging to, quote, engage all relevant stakeholders to improve outcomes on inclusion and diversity at all stages of the publishing process. In the response to our letter to Chemistry World, RSC clarifies that the guidelines were, quote, created in partnership with external experts and, quote, dovetail with existing policies and decision-making processes. The question that remains unaddressed is how the goals of inclusion and diversity will be advanced by the censorship of scientific publications. Yeah. How are you going to advance? How are you going to be inclusive of all viewpoints? Have a diversity of viewpoints because you're being inclusive of all viewpoints, hopefully, because if you're not being inclusive of all viewpoints, how can you be have diversity involved, right? How are you also going to advance science and allow for the pursuit of the truth if you are continually knocking down things and censoring things like this? Censorship is at odds with inclusion and diversity. Censorship should not be welcomed in a scientific publication, and it should not be welcome in a lot of things, period, but particularly not in scientific publications in STEM fields. It should absolutely be entirely unwelcome. Censorship is antithetical to the scientific enterprise. The publishers of the Royal Society of Chemistry should focus on its mission, facilitating the communication of high-quality chemistry research, and stay true to the purpose of the Royal Charter, quote, the general advancement of chemical science and its application. Rather than turning Twitter censorship into policy, scientific publishing worldwide should defend the core principle of science, the free exchange of ideas. And I will add to that, the free exchange of ideas for the pursuit of the truth. That would be the addition that I would make onto the end of that. But I wholeheartedly agree with this. This is utterly terrifying that a publisher would even consider this kind of level of overbroad guidance to editors, that you cannot publish anything that is to be upsetting, insulting, or objectionable to some people, because some people could be 5 people. Some people could be 2 people at this point, because that is some. So this is wildly overbroad. And again, I say kudos to you, Professor Krylov, Professor Franking, and Professor Gill. Your commentary here is most appreciated, and I hope I've done something to amplify it. If you're an editor, please take what I have just read in this letter to heart and push back on the publishers if this is the guidance that's being given. With respect to RSC, I would love to know who those external experts are that they got help from to develop those guidelines, because something doesn't ring quite right there. And, you know, for people who are reading journals, I suggest that if you see a mob pushing back on an article, and sometimes you don't see it because there's a lot going on the internet with Twitter mobs at the same time. It's very hard to tell unless it's not a huge mob, but a very vocal mob. And you sometimes just don't see it. But push back on this nonsense. Tell the journals that you want these things published, even if you don't agree, and especially if you don't agree. Tell them to make sure it's published. Push back on that. You can't just be quiet sometimes with these things, because then you do get ignored and censorship continues to happen. That's it for me. Again, this is a brilliant piece, and I'm glad to have seen it brought to my attention, despite the fact that the scary part of a publisher pushing censorship is really, really scary. In scientific journals, anyway. That's it for now. Until if you like the video, hit the like button. Share the video, subscribe to the channel, comment on the video, and let me know your thoughts and all that good jazz. And, of course, don't forget to come on over and be a supporter on Locals. Later this evening at 7 p.m. Central Time will be the first Thursday Thursday review of literature, followed by a Thursday Thoughts Live exclusive for local supporters. So if you want to join that, you better click down there and become a local supporter. Until next time, I am Adrian. I hope you all stay curious, my friends.